Welcome to the deep dive. We've got quite a pile of articles and notes here today.
Yeah, quite a stack.
And they're all circling around this really fundamental question about global missions, Christian missions specifically.
What are they really for?
Exactly. Is it, mainly about humanitarian work? It's doing good.
Yeah.
Or is there something deeper, something these sources argue is centered on God's glory?
That's the core tension, isn't it? And the sources really dig into why that distinction matters. So our plan today is to unpack this together.
Right. We want to pull out the most important insights for you to really understand what these sources define as the heart of Christian mission.
And why it goes beyond just, doing good deeds, important as those are.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You might find some perspectives here that honestly challenge how we usually think about compassion, about service, about the ultimate goals.
It could definitely shift things.
Okay, let's unpack this.
So where do they start? Well, they paint this picture of the missions landscape today. It's busy, right? Lots of activity.
Yeah, you see it everywhere. Lots of focus on justice issues, poverty, aid.
Right. Addressing very real, very urgent human suffering, important work.
No one's questioning the value of that work itself.
Yeah.
But the sources immediately raise a flag, don't they? A kind of warning.
They do. They talk about this risk, this potential pitfall they call mission drift.
Mission drift. Okay. What does that actually look like according to the notes?
Well, it's the danger that missions, while doing all these good things, could sort of slowly lose their unique purpose.
Become almost indistinguishable from, say, secular charities.
Exactly. It's presented as missions getting reduced, maybe unintentionally, to just programs, checklists, measurable outputs.
Like that phrase one source used, something...
Feeding the body, but leave the soul parched. It's stark, but it captures the worry. The human need becomes the end goal, rather than the place where a deeper encounter happens.
And there's external pressure involved too, right? The notes mention organizations feeling they have to show that tangible social impact.
Yes, and sometimes that pressure, even with good intentions, can push aside what another note called those moments of divine encounter.
It's not deliberate, but it happens.
Right, and that analogy they use is powerful, becoming window repairers who have forgotten the sun.
Yeah, you get really good at fixing the glass.
But you forget the whole point of the window is the light coming through it. It's doing good things, maybe, but for reasons that are incomplete.
Okay, so if that's the drift, the potential problem, what do these sources argue is the anchor, the true north for missions?
This is really the heart of it. They argue quite strongly that the fundamental purpose of Christian missions is to magnify God's glory, to spread the knowledge and awareness of His glory among all peoples.
God's glory, that can sound a little abstract maybe. How do they flesh that out?
They're careful about that. It's not just, cosmic applause. They define it as God's inherent worth, His intrinsic value made visible.
Made visible.
Yeah, the outward radiance of His inner reality. They even bring up the Hebrew word kavod. It has a sense of weight, substance, the sheer gravity of who God is.
A weight of His being.
Okay.
And that connects to the C.S. Lewis idea mentioned.
It does. Lewis argued that the greatest good isn't just easing temporary pain, though that's vital. The ultimate good is inviting people into the eternal delight of glorifying God, finding their deepest joy in Him.
So it flips the starting point. Human need is real. It's where we often start. But the ultimate beginning and end is God's glory.
Precisely. And that's the core difference they're drawing between a mission centered on human relief, a man-centered approach, they might say, and one centered on God's glory, revealing His worth, inviting worship.
Which leads right into that John Piper quote they cite. It's pretty blunt.
Missions exist because worship doesn't. Yeah.
Unpack that a bit. What's the idea there?
It means the ultimate reason we do missions isn't just because suffering exists. Suffering is the context, the opportunity. The ultimate reason is that billions of people don't know God, don't give Him the worship, the glory He deserves.
So missions is about creating worshipers.
Yeah.
Bringing people into that reality.
Where they don't currently exist, yes. That's the driving force, according to these sources.
That really reframes things. Okay, so if God's glory is the aim, and it's about creating worshipers, the sources argue this isn't some new concept the church cooked up.
Not at all. They trace it right through the Bible. They see it as this consistent, unfolding theme. God's own agenda, if you will.
Like a symphony you said earlier.
Yeah, a symphony of glory. Different parts, different eras, but all pointing towards His glory filling the earth.
Can you give us maybe just a couple of key examples from the text they highlight, just to get the flavor of this biblical thread?
Sure. Psalm 96.3 is direct. Declare his glory among the nations. It's a command. Make his worth known everywhere.
Pretty clear.
Or think about Habakkuk 2.14, that future vision. The earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. It's this inevitable total saturation.
Wow.
And they also point to Psalm 46.00. Be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. And they explain that be still isn't just about, quiet time.
Right, not just personal calm.
It's about ceasing our own frantic efforts and aligning with God's unstoppable plan to be glorified among all nations.
Okay, so it's deep in the Old Testament. What about the New? Does it carry through?
Absolutely. The Great Commission itself, Matthew 28, making disciples of all nations. The sources see that as flowing directly from Christ's own authority and calling people into worshipful relationship with God.
It's rooted in who he is.
And then you get to the end, Revelation 7, that incredible picture, the huge crowd from every tribe, tongue, people, nation.
All worshiping.
All worshiping before the throne. That's the end game depicted. It lines up with Romans 11.36. From him and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. It's cosmic.
And they even connect it to personal purpose, right? That catechism question.
Yes, the Westminster Shorter Catechism. Man's chief end is to glorify God and to enjoy him forever. The sources make a key point here. Enjoying God is part of glorifying him.
So it's not just duty.
No. It makes missions something that flows from delight in God. You're so captivated by his glory, you want to spread that delight, that satisfaction.
Okay, this is crucial then. If the ultimate aim is God's glory, creating worshipers, where does compassion fit? What about helping the suffering? These sources aren't saying ditch that, are they?
No, absolutely not. They're very clear on this. Compassion, service, they aren't diminished or denied at all. They're just reframed.
Reframed how?
As the necessary fruit that grows from a love for God and love for others. But they aren't the root of the mission itself.
So loving God deeply naturally leads to caring for people.
Exactly. The argument is that acts of service actually flow more powerfully, more purposefully, when they're expressions of that deeper commitment to God's glory. They become more than just good deeds.
They become, what, signs?
Embodied proclamations, tangible signs pointing to the one you're trying to glorify.
Like when Jesus healed people or fed the crowds.
Precisely. The sources emphasize his miracles weren't just random kindness. They pointed to who he was, to his glory. Healing the sick showed he was the great physician.
Feeding the hungry, the bread of life.
Healing the blind, the light of the world. Even Lazarus' illness, Jesus said, was for God's glory.
Right.
These acts of mercy were, as one source puts it, portals to glory. They opened a window onto a deeper reality. They weren't ends in themselves.
Portals to glory. I like that phrasing. It connects the practical help to the ultimate spiritual point.
Yes. Because true love, they argue, doesn't just stop at relieving temporary pain, essential as that is. It points through that relief to the one who offers eternal redemption and lasting satisfaction.
It refuses to settle for just, say, filling a stomach without offering the living water.
Exactly, or patching the window without pointing to the sun. It's not a choice between compassion or glory. It's compassion in service of glory.
Okay, now this is where it gets really practical, maybe even uncomfortable. What happens, according to these sources, when mission does lose sight of God's glory, when that focus dims?
Well, they outline several dangers, clear shifts that can happen. One is a shift from worship to works.
Yeah.
Meaning the focus subtly moves away from the magnificence of God and onto our efforts, our programs, our impact stats. It becomes more about what we're achieving.
Instead of who he is.
Right.
Yeah.
And related to that is a shift from proclamation to pragmatism.
Pragmatism, like just doing what seems to work.
Kind of, where getting results, often measured by secular standards, becomes so important that the core gospel message might get diluted, softened into general goodwill or social improvement principles because that's seen as more acceptable or effective.
The good news itself gets sidelined a bit.
Potentially. And a third shift they warn about is from eternity to emergency.
Where the immediate crisis overshadows the long-term need.
Exactly. The urgent needs of right now, and they are urgent, can eclipse the fundamental eternal need for people to be reconciled to God. Temporal fixes start to feel more ultimate than eternal truth.
So how would you know if this drift is happening? Do the sources give any, diagnostic questions? Ways to check?
They do. They suggest asking things like, is Jesus Christ explicitly named and central in this work? Is the ultimate aim genuine worship and knowing God, or is it primarily about improving circumstances?
Okay.
Does the work create dependency on the missionary or the organization, or does it point people towards dependency on God? And maybe most telling,
Yeah.
what are the real metrics of success?
What are we actually counting?
Are we measuring heavenly values, things like people coming to faith, disciples being made, healthy churches planted, worshipers gathered, God's glory being multiplied? Or are we mainly counting the human development stats, numbers served, wells dug, buildings constructed, without that clear link to spiritual transformation?
That really cuts through. The danger, then, is humanitarianism without heaven, development without discipleship.
Comfort becoming an idol, even unintentionally. It's those patched windows, again, looking fixed maybe, but no longer catch the sun, no longer revealing the light.
Which brings us back full circle to that Piper quote.
Missions exists because worship doesn't. Yeah.
And it seems like worship isn't just the reason for mission, it's also the engine, the fuel.
That's a key point they make. Worship is the end goal. Yes, that picture in Revelation 7. But it's also the power source for mission.
How so?
They point to examples like Acts 13. The church was worshiping, praying, fasting. And then the Holy Spirit set apart Paul and Barnabas for the first missionary journey.
Okay.
Or Isaiah 6. Isaiah encounters God's staggering glory in worship, and that leads directly to him saying, "Here am I, send me."
So worship tunes our hearts to God's purposes and gives us the passion to share his glory.
Exactly. And there's that connected idea. God is most glorified in us when we are most satisfied in him.
Satisfied in him.
When our deepest joy is found in his glory, it naturally overflows. We want others to experience that same satisfaction. So missions becomes about spreading satisfaction in God.
That shifts it from feeling like a heavy duty to an overflow of joy.
It really does. And the sources talk about this global crisis of worship. Billions aren't just lacking food or water. They're lacking awe for the true God. They're bowing down to other things, idols of materialism, power, self, whatever.
The biggest deficit isn't material.
The most profound crisis, they argue, is the lack of worship. So missions has to aim higher than just relief. It aims for revelation. Higher than just help. It aims for holiness. Beyond only seeking justice to pointing people to Jesus, the source of all true righteousness.
This is challenging stuff, but it's not just theory, right? The sources get really practical about how to reclaim this God-centered vision. What does this look like, say, for churches?
Yeah, they offer concrete steps. For churches, it means teaching missions consistently, not as just one program among many, but as core to God's global plan and their own identity.
Making it central.
And evaluating partnerships, projects, looking first through that glory and gospel lens, not just asking, is it doing good, but is it ultimately contributing to God being known and worshiped?
Sending people who are worshipers first.
Exactly. Sending people whose hearts are captured by God's glory, not just people with skills, and framing the church budget, the conversations around that vision of Revelation 7, that future global choir.
Constantly asking, how does this get us closer to that?
Right. It also means cultivating a theology of glory in the preaching and teaching, moving beyond just be good moralism to fostering genuine adoration, helping people see God's character and be amazed by it.
Shaping the heart, not just behavior.
Designing worship services that intentionally reflect God's attributes, not just our feelings. Doxological formation, they call it. And then embodying God's glory as a community through genuine holiness, through radical love and unity that stands out. Making the church itself a showcase of God's character, like Jesus talked about in John 13 and 17. Even seeing ordinary life, our jobs, our families, as places to reflect God's glory. Seeing faithfulness in the everyday as worship.
That's a high calling for the local church. What about for missionaries and workers actually on the field? What's a practical takeaway for them?
For them, the source is stress. Be theologians and lovers of God first. Let your passion for the nations flow out of a passion for his name, his glory.
It starts with their own relationship with God.
Absolutely. And then making sure to integrate compassion with crystal clear gospel proclamation. Acts of mercy need to be windows to the gospel, not substitutes for it.
So digging that well
is an opportunity to talk about the living water and anchor in their daily work, which is often exhausting and discouraging, in personal adoration of God. That's the fuel to avoid burnout.
Seeing the bigger picture in the daily grind.
Yes. Seeing every act of service as somehow echoing Christ's supremacy. Never separating word and deed. Training needs to include not just practical skills, but deep theology and doxology, knowing God and how to worship him.
Building that gospel intentionality into everything.
Right. Like seeing an orphanage not just as shelter, but as a picture of God adopting us in Christ. equipping workers not just to serve effectively, but to speak the word clearly, boldly, and preparing them for hardship with a solid theology of suffering, knowing God's strength shows up in weakness.
Okay, what about for you, the listener, the individual believer? How does this connect to everyday life?
The sources say your life, your job, your home, your interactions is a primary stage for God's glory. Your involvement in missions isn't just financial, it's prayer, it's learning, it's living intentionally in a way that points people to God.
So how we live matters as much as what we support.
Absolutely. Giving, praying, maybe going, but always with an eye toward eternal worship, not just temporary fixes. Becoming someone whose compassion is so clearly rooted in love for God that it naturally makes people curious about him.
Asking not just how can I help, but how can I glorify God here?
That's the shift. And cultivating a heart that's genuinely captivated by God's beauty and worth, because that fuels the urgency to share him. Your life right now is part of this grand symphony making God known.
That brings it home. Okay, finally, what about mission leaders and agencies, the organizations directing this work?
Big implications for them. Critically examine mission statements, goals. Is God's glory explicitly front and center? Anchor everything, fundraising, strategy, field operations in that ultimate purpose.
No mission drift allowed at the leadership level.
Right. Intentionally embed gospel proclamation and discipleship into every initiative. Don't let good deeds become detached from the good news, and the sources strongly push for prioritizing the unreached.
Where worship truly doesn't exist yet.
Yes. Focus efforts where God's glory is least known, like Paul did. Don't just stick to the comfortable places. Invest heavily in indigenous leaders and church planting, building sustainable, culturally relevant movements of worship.
Making it local and lasting.
Integrate solid theology and worship into all training. Partner strategically with others who share this God-centered vision. And this is tough. Make funding decisions based on contribution to God's glory and worship, not just on easily measurable development stats.
That requires courage. Measuring success differently.
Measuring success biblically. Conversions, healthy churches, mature disciples, vibrant worship, gospel spread, and constantly evaluating, doing spiritual audits to stay on course, adapting strategies always through that glory gospel lens.
And those examples you mentioned earlier illustrate this, right? That doctor whose clinic is also a place of witness.
The relief agency adding intentional gospel ministry.
The church plan embodying God's character.
The agency redirecting funds based on a glory lens. It shows this isn't just abstract, it leads to real-world choices.
Building on that, the sources also talk about the church's identity. Not just what it does in mission, but what it is.
Yeah, they use that image. The church isn't the light, it's the window, made to display God's glory.
Like Ephesians 3:1 says.
Exactly. It's meant to refract his light to the world. It's not primarily a social club or just a service agency. It's more like a spiritual embassy, a doxological organism, a living thing designed for worship.
And that line, the church is the mission before it ever sends a missionary. What's that getting at?
It means a church that is genuinely healthy, vibrant, full of love, holiness, unity, a church embodying God's glory. That church itself is a powerful witness. It's a foretaste of the kingdom, attracting people to God even before formal programs start.
The community itself proclaims something.
It's corporate worship, the way members love each other, like John 13 and 17. It's discipleship. It all reflects God's character. And interestingly, the sources point out there's a cosmic dimension, too.
The cosmic.
Ephesians 3:9, again, God's wisdom is made known through the church to the spiritual powers. What happens in the church is apparently being watched on a bigger stage than we realize.
Wow. Every act of faithfulness matters.
It's a declaration. The church is a mirror reflecting the sun, not a spotlight trying to shine on itself, made to make much of God.
So let's circle back to that idea of weight kavod. Reclaiming the weight of glory. It sounds like the sources see this not as a burden, but as grounding.
Exactly. Not a crushing weight, but a divine gravity. Something that gives stability, direction, ultimate purpose. It changes everything.
How we pray.
Yes, praying for God's revelation, for people to see his glory like Moses did, or like Jesus implied in John 6.
How we worship.
Seeing worship not just as a Sunday event, but the wellspring, the fuel for everything else, like in Acts 2.
How we do mission.
Boldly, compassionately, but always pointing beyond the immediate to the ultimate reality of God's glory. How we live our ordinary lives.
It creates that cycle you mentioned. Prayer leads to seeing God's glory.
Which fuels worship.
It drives the mission.
Which results in more worshipers, more glory, and it takes constant effort, right? Intentionality, recalibration.
Keeping our focus sharp.
The call from these sources is clear. Forget the gimmicks, focus on glory. Stop trying to create our own hype, reflect his light, move past man-centered solutions to God-centered awe.
Because the ultimate goal isn't just improving lives, as good as that is.
But seeing more people worshiping the true God, not just better societies, but God truly glorified within them.
This has been, wow, a really deep dive. It clarifies so much. Compassion and service are vital, absolutely essential.
But their highest purpose, their greatest power, comes when they flow directly from and point explicitly towards that ultimate goal. God being glorified among all peoples.
It doesn't mean doing less, does it?
Not at all. If anything, it means doing everything with a greater sense of eternal significance, with that heavenly intentionality.
So here's a final thought for you, the listener, to maybe chew on today. Building on all this, if God's glory really is the ultimate purpose behind everything, like Romans 11 or Philippians 2 suggests, how could the ordinary parts of your life, right now, become a stage for displaying his glory?
Yeah, what would it look like for you personally to live consciously under that gravity of glory today, in your work, your family, your neighborhood?
A question that really invites us to see things differently, something to mull over.
Definitely worth thinking about, and maybe exploring that weight of glory idea a bit more yourself.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.